our emotions, which obviously get wound up in our relationships, they drive our body chemistry. I actually call our emotional chemistry our social physiology. Yeah, that you can be walking down the street in a fair mood. Suddenly, somebody looks at you in a really strange way. Pow! Just like that, your chemistry's changed in an instant. You've gone from survival, happy mode, into self defense mode. What's going on here? That's emotional chemistry. It's relational, and that's what really makes me click. Is how the quality of our relationships affects our emotional world, affects our physiology, affects our health. How stress builds up, affects heart problems, stomach problems, you name it, arthritis problems, mental problems. That's what drew me away from the academic work and into the real world, really.
Are you curious about discovering ways of making your life better? Then welcome to my podcast. I'm Bob Nickman, and this is The Exploding Human. Listen in while I talk with all kinds of people in the fields of personal growth, health and healing, alternative therapies, psychology, spirituality, environment, and the future. I'm looking for those answers that make life better for everyone. You'll meet cutting-edge practitioners, doctors, artists, filmmakers, business people, and those who have overcome challenges. The brave, the curious, anyone who is out there helping us humans to explore, expand, and explode. Hey, welcome to The Exploding Human. My name is Bob Nickman. My guest today is Trevor Griffiths, and we're going to be talking about the connections between the mind and our emotions and some of the mental tricks that hide us from reality. But first, I'd like to invite you to visit my website, theexplodinghuman.com. Over there, you can listen to episodes, read synopses, see photos of my guests, read a little bio on myself. There's also a YouTube channel where you can listen. That is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. As I said, my guest today is Trevor Griffiths. He comes to us from the UK, where he studied medicine, neuroscience, and immunology at Oxford University before becoming a pioneer doctor for 25 years in systemic family health care. So we're going to be talking a lot about how the mind works, how the emotions work, how we can communicate better, and some of the research that he has been involved in and illuminates for us. I don't want to say too much because Trevor says it better than me. So here he is. This is Trevor Griffiths. Trevor, it's so great to meet you. I enjoyed our little pre-talk before we started the recording, and hope everything's going well in the UK.
We live in a nice part of the UK here. We can feel quite relaxed. Thanks for the invite, Bob. It's great to be here.
Well,
thanks.
Yeah, I always love talking to people that are doing interesting things that I'm not doing. So, if I can learn something and my audience can go, oh, I never thought about it like that. Mm-hmm. And I think we've accomplished something, even if it's opening the door to some interesting ways of thinking and possibilities.
Yeah.
So, and I know that, I was intrigued by, when I was reading your bio, that you had studied medicine, neuroscience, and immunology, but you're not really doing that now. But you are also, because those that kind of groundwork, particularly I would say neuroscience and the mind, the biological sort of side of the mind, and now you're really delving into the emotional side. What was the transition that made you veer toward what you're doing now? How did that happen?
The way those three are all connected. As I was studying medicine mainly, but I just got into the theory side of it. I just loved the biochemistry. But it was an area called cell populations. So the brain, of course, is a collection of cells. The immune system is a collection of cells. And what people don't know is that there are more cells in the immune system than there are in the brain. And they're all talking to each other chemically. And the whole lot is communicating together. So the neuroscience and the immunology and the general thing about medicine, how the body as a whole works, is all about communication patterns. Now, I got particularly interested in immunology for all sorts of reasons. We could look at that. I signed up for a PhD on cancer research, looking at cell membranes. And I was just getting sort of started on all of that And I suddenly thought I could see myself in a white coat in a lab for the rest of my life. And I thought, how blooming boring. I thought, this is not really what I'm cut out for. I went into medicine to be with people, and I abandoned the academic side of the research, and I went off into back into medical training, and found that I just loved people. So rather than specializing, I was going to specialize in rheumatology, joint problems. We've got a lot of immune problems, and also emotional relational dynamics affect arthritis problems quite a bit. So that I found that quite interesting. Um, but along the way, various things directed my attention towards just accident and emergency, being a general physician out in the community. Now, in England, the National Health Service, you have a list of patients as a general practitioner. You've got anything up to about 3,000 patients or so, and you get into a group, you've got 12,000 patients, and you get to know the families. And that's what really clicked me in. I was actually interested in family dynamics because that's all about communications as well. How people get stuck into habits of understanding each other, anticipating what's going to happen next. Somebody comes in a bad mood again, and everybody goes off into what's called the family script. They're all going off down their lines of how am I going to cope with this and what's going to happen next. It's all about communication patterns, which sometimes can be very stimulating and really make life incredibly rich. And sometimes the opposite happens, and they can turn life into hell. And that's the bit that was catching my attention. How do we somehow help people to communicate a bit better so that life becomes more fulfilling, imaginative, creative, just what life's meant to be all about, really. And so that's where I was into back into medicine, and the neuroscience and the immunology, they all tie together because our emotions, which obviously get wound up in our relationships, they drive our body chemistry. I actually call our emotional chemistry our social physiology. Yeah, that you can be walking down the street in a fair mood. Suddenly, somebody looks at you in a really strange way. Pow, just like that, your chemistry's changed in an instant. You've gone from survival, happy mode, into self defense mode. What's going on here? That's emotional chemistry. It's relational, and that's what really makes me click. Is how the quality of our relationships affects our emotional world, affects our physiology, affects our health. How stress builds up, affects heart problems, stomach problems, you name it, arthritis problems, mental problems. Um, that's what drew me away from the academic work and into the real world, really, that sort of thing.
It's a really fascinating idea about communication because there's that biological cellular level of communication and the chemical communication between different parts of the body, and then you bring it outward to people talking and being emotionally involved, whether there's talk or not talk.
Yeah,
Seeing that correlation, I never really looked at it like that. I mean, maybe a little bit, but not the way you just described it. It's almost like, well, it's if you want to take it even further, there's a universal communication going
yes,
on at all these different levels, from cellular all the way to universal mind and consciousness, if you want to really look at it that way. And what's actually going on as human beings, where we can uh, live a life that works more often than it doesn't.
hmm
And so that brings me to the idea of thought, not just well, thought as a result of we'll just talk about the family
hmm
behaviors, family beliefs, family dynamics, and how that those things affect the way we think when we, like you say, you're walking around in the outside world that's not your family, and somebody looks at you funny. Depending on the family of origin and what's happened there, you're going to react to that look like it could be anything from, I think I need to kill that guy, he's an asshole, to,
Right.
oh,
There's a
that person
range.
must be
Yeah.
really hurting to because I haven't done anything and I'm doing well, and it's not really oh, I have compassion for that person. And
Mm,
usually the answer is somewhere in between because
mm,
we're kind of reactive creatures anyway. So when you talk about these things and changing emotional lives, it's really, to me, thought management and thought awareness, and
hmm
looking at what my beliefs are in any given situation, and
Yeah,
how I'm reacting, or reacting as opposed to maybe responding to a situation.
sure. Bobby gone straight for the big issue that's going around at the moment in the whole psychology field, the mental health field, social dynamics. That certainly in England, I think it probably is the same in America. Much a lot of clinical psychology, health psychology, is focused on what's called cognition. It's the way we understand things, the sorts of thoughts that we put together, how what the ideas that are going around in our mind, as you said, the beliefs that guide things. And of course, modern neuroscience, with all of its very clever scanning methods that can actually see real time into what the brain's doing, um, everyone's got fascinated with the cerebral cortex, and what's happening up there, while all these thoughts are on the go and so on. So everything has got very focused on the cognitive. And they say, the cognitive behavioral therapist guys say that emotions, our emotional experience, is a spin off from our thoughts. Technical word, an epiphenomenon, and it's a side effect. That if your habits of thinking are such that you will tend to run yourself down, or your habit of thinking is you tend to be accusing somebody else or whatever, your emotions will drift along with that thought. And therefore, if you want to help someone to settle their emotional world down, then look at their habits of thinking, help them to recognize their habits of thinking, use behavioral methods to change those habits, and lo and behold, their emotional world will settle down. That's the theory. And that's the big one that's going around. Now, I came from a fairly troubled family background. Um, and I saw all sorts of emotions flying around in the family. And that's partly what sort of primed me to look at emotions later on. Now, I'm not sure if I'm going to say this the right way around, but have you heard of what's called adverse childhood experiences? ACE.
I
ACE.
haven't heard that acronym, but I understand having, a traumatic experience as a kid, or just,
That's it.
living in an environment that's, not particularly
That's right.
functioning at a high level.
No, yeah, that's it. You're absolutely, that's what ACEs are. And a whole load of research in the last 20 years has shown that if you have four or more cumulative traumatizing things in your childhood, then it has a lifelong effect on the way your brain develops and so on. Now, the work I've done has looked at loss reactions. What happens when something that's important to you gets challenged? Yeah. And it's like grieving, but it's not when someone's died. It's when you've lost your wallet, or when you've lost a job, or you've missed an interview. Any loss, anything that's important to you, will trip off a whole string of emotions as part of a reaction, which has a useful purpose. And all the emotions of it are very unpleasant. Yeah. But people think that they just get in the way of your thinking. But recent work has shown, well, even in the last 20 years, really, has shown that those emotions are actually giving you vital information about your values, about what's important to you. You'd only trip off into those emotions if something that was important to you was being challenged. And that's what we teach through this model called, I've called it emotional logic, which is not necessarily the best of names, but, Emotional Logic Center teaches how these unpleasant emotions fit together to make a healthy adjustment process. Now, what we've found, if you could imagine this, a baby born to a mother who's a heroin addict, a baby who's neglected in some way, doesn't have their needs met in the first year of life, will be grieving, even though they don't have language to express it. But those same emotions are inbuilt genetically. And what we've found is that people have an emotional experience of life before they have a cognitive frame of any sort. that involves language, communication, mutual understanding, and so on. So what we're saying is that we're teaching, emotional logic teaches the other half of cognitive behavioral therapy. Right? I'm not claiming that's wrong. It's powerful as far as it goes. But there's another story, right? One story is your thoughts start off your emotions. The other is you develop an emotional habit very early on in life, in the first 7 years of your life. And that actually shapes your brain. And that actually affects your future. Now, you can relearn that to some extent, but it does have a lifelong impact as well. So we're saying that your emotional experience actually affects your beliefs about yourself and the world. And out of those beliefs come your thoughts. It's the other way around. So when I encounter, if I've been traumatized and I come in home and lo and behold, there's an argument going on in the background, right? It's going to trip off a whole load of emotions in me, and my thoughts will follow my emotions. Now, it is also true that as a teenager, as an adult, or whatever, because we've got memories like this, it is also true that our thoughts, when we think back to all those arguments we had in the home, right, and I'm anticipating it's going to happen again, it'll start off emotions. So it's not untrue. It's just that that's a truth for adults who've got memories, who've already had a brain that's been formed by their emotional experience. Yeah. And what we found is that by teaching people about their emotions in a new way, we can actually help them to relearn some of those early things that they learned when they didn't really have the language to understand it. So there's two halves of a coin. They can mutually support each other, particularly in depressions. But actually, we're finding when people understand their emotions, it really gets deep to liberate their lives. That's the sort of stuff that we're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating stuff. I have a friend. I'll just give you sort of an example of what you're talking about. I think it's a good example. I have a friend. He is, I think he's 80 or 81.
All right.
Somewhere in that age. You know, he's in his 80s.
Yeah.
He lives with this woman he's lived with for a long time. And when she acts out in some way, he'll call me and he'll say, "Oh, this is what she did," and it's triggered this feeling of that I'm abandoned and not taken care of at all, and not understood and not loved. And he's done enough work on himself where he goes, "I know this isn't accurate. I know it doesn't mean that." He goes, but he goes, "It's pre-verbal.
Yeah.
He goes, this goes so far back to the way I was raised by his mother, who had serious mental health issues." And
Sure.
so he goes, and it's so powerful and so strong. And even though I know it cognitively, I'm absolutely twisted up inside every time this happens. And so, his sort of technique is to call somebody and talk it through, which does help. I mean, he calls me and I'm like, and my wife has a friend that she talks to when she's upset, and the woman says to her, "How old are you right now?" She
Right.
says, "That's the question." And a couple times my wife has gone, "I'm 7, I'm 4." She says, like, so what you're
Right.
talking about, these sort of emotional things that get put in there,
And he that's a fabulously right on the point story of him always recognizing this is pre-verbally, goes way back. And that's the key for somebody like him, where the thought, he's named it as abandonment or whatever, comes after the emotional experience.
Yes, absolutely. In
Now,
this case, for
what
sure.
we would be teaching people, and we have various ways of card sorting methods and various ways that people can begin to connect with their emotional experience first. It's becoming mindful of your emotional world, but we can map them using card sorting methods. It's amazing how complex people's emotional worlds are. And, you can see these patterns.
Wait, say this again. I missed what you said. Mapping what?
People's emotional worlds. And we have sets of cards, your inner emotional world.
Okay. Cards, you're saying? CARDS?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's actually
okay. Now we're into some concrete tools. I'm interested in this very
All
much.
right. Look, okay. I'll tell you what. I'm going to say this now. I'll say it again a bit later. There is a book out on the market, okay, by for Amazon or whatever, called Emotional Logic: Harnessing Your Emotions into Inner Strength. And that book's got a number of these card patterns in it, and it explains the background
Okay.
to them.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
We got a set of 7 cards, orange coloured, because they're meant to be stepping stones that you stand on to cross a river. They're firm places of inner organization. And they represent 7 core loss emotions, which all have useful purposes but don't feel great. There's one for shock, there's one for denial, anger, guilty self questioning. There's something called bargaining, which is about yearning and longing. I want that back. There's depressive emptiness, and then acceptance. There's a sadness that comes with acceptance and so on, but also a joy of release. And we've got cards with those names on. And we will say to somebody, okay, think back to this situation. So you got stuck in a traffic jam and missed this really important interview. Yeah. How did you feel? You show. Don't tell me how you feel. How that's important. Don't tell me how you feel, which activates the cognitive brain. Use these cards to show me how you feel. So now you're into what's called kinesthetic, handling the cards. You're actually handling your emotions. And it's amazing how our inner emotion, our inner world is almost spatially structured. And people will start putting cards down in a certain pattern. And they'll say, well, first of all, I felt angry. And I'll put it there. And then I felt guilty because I should have left earlier. So I'll put that there. And then I was shocked. And that, no, that goes over here. That came first. So they start laying out this pattern. And we've discovered over time, we've been doing this 20 years, we discovered over time that the spatial layout of that pattern amazingly accurately reflects how people move between their emotions in their bodies. You know, they feel the anger here, or they feel it here, or wherever they feel. You know, but the dynamics you can see going on in this card pattern are laying out there what's going on inside. And the problem is when it's going on inside, it overwhelms people. When it's out in a pattern and they can see it and it's slowed, we're slowing time down by putting it in a pattern, suddenly you can say, well, we look at these patterns and we say, gosh, that's complicated, isn't it? There's a load of stuff going on there. No wonder you feel bad. You know, we say if you didn't feel bad, there'd be something wrong, wouldn't there? Because, I mean, this is quite an important issue for you. But here we can see that we begin to see certain features of the pattern. So if anger and guilt are overlying each other, it means when I feel angry, I also feel guilty. When I feel guilty, I also feel angry. And we know that that combination leads on to compulsive drives. So people will be going round and round in their thoughts, or if they got a habit of obsessional cleanliness, they'll be going around and sort of cleaning impossibly or tidying things away, whatever their habit is. Yeah. And what we say to people is, this is simply the grieving you, right? You're not ill. You're not mad. You're not bad. You're not a weak character. This is grief. Things that are important to you are being challenged. The grief, you know, you only grieve if you've loved, is what we say. Join the human race. Yeah, this is important stuff. This is you in a challenged state. And the more you understand what useful purpose those emotions have, the more you'll be able to untangle yourself from it. And we've got information on the back. Turn the cards over and have a look at it and learn how they fit together to make this adjustment process. And I reckon your guy, even at the age of 81, we've done this with people in that age, would learn something new and find a liberation, find a freedom from this, because rather than telling yourself, I was damaged in my past and there's nothing I can do about it. No, the more I understand the grieving me, the more I am liberated to explore a new way. And people do. So I'd just like to give, I enjoy giving people encouragement, you know, that you can discover new ways at any stage of life.
Yeah, I mean, if I didn't feel that there was always a possibility to improve a situation, that would be just an awful way to live. Because and some of this stuff is really hard to change, but the thing that makes it really hard to change, I think, is because these emotions, in particular, are so unpleasant, as you were talking about. You want to avoid it. So the survival instinct, emotional survival instinct, is to move away, not into. And I don't know what the difference is between the people that are willing to sort of face the fire and the ones that want to run. And I've done both, obviously, at different times, depending on how eager I am to change or afraid to change. And I'm not sure, how much, what percentage of humanity is even aware of these things and is willing to look at it.
I just generally chunk people's up into thirds. I mean, a third of people somehow intuitively know this stuff, um, can get on with life, they can respond constructively, they're able to be empathic to others who are troubled. There's a third who are overwhelmed, traumatized, lost, hurting, and there's a third in the middle we're just a mixture. All of us are mixtures. We're all carrying stuff somehow, and we either contain it and manage it, or it takes us over at times and trips us up. But what I would say is that the more anybody understands how these unpleasant emotions are there for a reason, they're built into our genetics for survival reasons to help us to adapt and adjust and explore new ways to reconnect with what's important to us. Yeah, but it doesn't feel like that at the time. They're purposely, I believe, unpleasant because they're there to drive us to do something new, to explore something new. We're not supposed to stay with them. It's one of the things I have a worry about mindfulness, where it says just stay with these emotions, engage with them, yes, but understand their useful purposes and then harness that energy around having named some values. What's important to me that's being challenged here? I'm going to harness this emotion into an action plan to try and recover that thing that I've lost, or that is at risk of being lost. And so those emotions are not just information about our values; they're also the energy to recover the value, to build build a future on those values. Yeah. So that's the sort of message that we can give people. But a lot of it, right. So anybody who learns how those fit together could become what we call a safe place for something. So you were saying your friend phones you to have a conversation. Well, Bob, thumbs up. You're a safe place for that friend. Yeah. He will turn to you to talk about it. Forgive me for saying this, but if you wanted to come on an emotional logic course and learn how these things fit together, or get that book, it'll teach you as well. You would have something constructive to say to this friend that would be a bit new, might open a door for him to explore. Yeah. And then you can explore it together. You keep the conversations going. We have this other little phrase, the healing is in the conversation. We're all learning all the time about this. I'm still learning from card patterns that I see from other people. Everybody's unique. It's quite amazing. There's actually a second set of cards as well, which people would see in the book. But using that second set of cards, in 20 years, I would say I have never seen two identical patterns. Everybody is different. Every situation we face brings up a different pattern of emotions. But when you understand the process, the healing process, hidden in that pattern, suddenly that becomes your energy. And it's called the collapse of chaos. You collapse all of that emotional chaos into an action plan targeted on a named value that you've identified that's been causing it. That's the sort of the strategy of the whole thing. Emotion is energy in motion, and we can harness it.
A lot of thoughts on what you were just talking about. First of all, the idea that, well, obviously we know that emotions, there's a lot of energy behind them or in them.
Mm.
And energy is what everything is. It's vibration, it's energy. So what can I learn from this energy is kind of what you're talking about. And how can I harness the power of these energies to my own benefit and others?
To improve life. Yeah.
And also, you did mention some genetic things. You mentioned genetics, which I find really fascinating. I recently did a genetic workup through this company.
Oh, yeah.
And there are behavioral and mood patterns, genetic behavioral and mood patterns, which I thought was really interesting.
Yeah.
My genetic tendencies, not to say that they're absolute, because it's not that. But there was one thing that I found super fascinating, because I always wondered this about myself. And this showed up in the genetic pattern, which is my genetics indicate that I'm somebody who is really very good at a lot of things, but there's no one thing that I go after to be, um, an expert or a master of. I've never
Right on.
wanted to do that. I've worked really hard at a bunch of stuff and gotten really good at a bunch of stuff. Let's say it's 5 things maybe, which is a lot to me. It's a lot of
Hmm.
things to get good at. And I always wondered why, somebody will say, well, what do you do? Who are you? And a person will say, well, I'm a scientist, or somebody will say, I'm a writer, and somebody will say, I'm a musician. Um, Now I've done writing. I've been a musician. I've drawn. I've had that
Hmm.
artistic. So most of my gifts are in the artistic, but I don't identify with any of them. As when somebody says, "Are you so what? Are you a writer?" I'm like, "Well, I write, but I'm not. I don't take on the label. I don't have to be, the best at it. I don't even care. I don't even care.
Hmm.
I just enjoy it." So that sort of showed up genetically, and I was like, because I always felt a little bit bad about myself that I never was able to, or had any desire to pick a thing and be that thing. The idea of
Yeah.
an identity based on what I did always seemed kind of silly to me because I never thought that was exactly what I was inside.
Hmm.
Like they're just sort of peripheral identities, even though I work hard at them. You know what I'm talking about? So
I do. I
genetically,
get you. I get you what you're saying. Yeah,
so yeah, so
definitely.
genetically,
Yeah.
I went, oh, this is why. Kind of let me off the hook. I felt a little bit better about myself. A couple
Yeah.
notches. You don't want to feel too good about yourself, or you're not going to get anything done. So
Mm.
I'm joking, obviously, but so and I wonder about genetic, emotions,
Yeah.
and moods that get, and then also then we can talk about a little bit when what you hear about this is historical genetics based on the things that happen to ancestors that get passed,
Well,
those are
that's
really interesting ideas of, the children of the children of Holocaust survivors are still going to have stuff, and some of it's cognitively passed along and historically, but is there a genetic piece to it?
absolutely. And I wouldn't be able to talk about genetics without talking about that ancient history, because the way I understand genetics, I mean, is fabulous. When they started doing work on cloning, they realized that the idea that your genetic material is what's like a blueprint that actually determines the way you are, like a very cause effect link between them, got blown out the water. I don't know if you remember. I remember seeing this photograph in the British newspapers of there's a pig, a mother pig that was cloned into about 8 piglets all suckling at the same time, and every bottom was different. And they realized that genetics, and then the new word came out, epigenetics,
Yes.
which is it used to be called nature and nurture, wasn't it? How much was that? Now it's called genetics and epigenetics, but it's the same principle that every little feature of our engagement with our environment, from inside the womb to right the way through, is modifying the type of expression of our genetic material. Yeah. So a woman who becomes pregnant, a whole load of things of her genetics will shut down and a whole new batch of genes will open up. So there's enormous untapped potential in our genetic makeup. Yeah. We're only expressing a small proportion of it right now, this moment. Most of it's shut down. And a lot of it is active. If we move off to the Antarctic, different genes will open up because what the genetics is doing is it's determining our range of responsiveness to environmental stimuli. The way it's a range of responsiveness. Now, some people, they've got a very narrow range and they're very predictable and life's very simple and straightforward and carries on like that every day of their lives. Other people have a very wide range. And that will be because in your ancient history, you have your genetic material is rather like another type of memory. It's a memory of what's helped your ancestors to survive. in their changing environments. And now it's embedded into you that if a similar set of environmental circumstances come up, you will have that range available to you as well. You're depending on the environment you put yourself into, you will be a slightly different sort of person. Obviously, 99% of you is still the same Bob, you know, but there'll be an extra bit of something that appears. And that's my guess of what's happening when suddenly you're presented with some artistic materials, or there's a musical instrument there, and you think, oh yeah, I'd love to go at that, you know, that you've got that capacity to respond to that opportunity in that way, and it will feel natural to you. It'll just be the way you are. But the way you are is because way back in the last sort of 5,000 years or however long the genetic line is, people have survived, you know, with that range.
The range is the interesting part, because you can go to one end of the range or the other, anything in between. But it also, the interesting part is it really limits the idea, and not that it's a bad thing, because I don't think it is, the idea of free will. Because you do up to a point, but then again, you know, some of this stuff is actually, it's in there and there's not that much you can do about getting outside that range, you know.
This is the tough subject, isn't it? Because I'm a firm believer that there is free will, but it is constrained by these ranges, by our lived history as well, by our memories, by the hurts and scars that we carry, by the beautiful things that have happened that give us a hope and an anticipation as well. They're all opening and closing different avenues all the time. But yeah, the genetics is obviously a massive one. And it varies throughout our life, doesn't it? As we get older, different genes are opening up. They're not all shutting down. There are new ones that are opening. And therefore, you've got to move into whatever your next stage of life is to find the fullness of what it's like to be at this age. You know, if I just was forever moaning that I can't play squash any longer, you know, what a miserable, you know, fart I'd be, you know. But I mean, if I say, no, come on, at my age, there's all sorts of things I can do that I couldn't do then, and get on and really live it to the full, everything in my body is going to work better. My immune system will work better. My nervous system will be on the go. The social messages I'm giving to people will bounce backwards and forwards more. You know, life's going to get a movement in it. It's all about being able to make use of opportunities, and that's where the free will comes in. Am I going to choose to make use of this opportunity or not, you know, or shut down instead?
And how much of that choice making is predetermined by genetics? You know, what hamstrings people from pursuing more, and other people just go, I'm not doing that. We're all capable of either, obviously, but it's, you know, some people are very, I would just use the word courageous, in that they're willing to look at certain things, and other people are just terrified.
You're right. And it's going to be a forever unanswerable question, is how much of that limitation is genetic and how much is the epigenetic, experiential, memorized stuff that's come with it. We'll never know, but the only thing we can do anything about is the epigenetic stuff. It is, okay, what is this? Where am I now? You know, what is this environment? What opportunities are there? And to recognize that there genuinely is a choice between options in this setting. Now, I might have a very narrow range of choices, but I've got another one of these little phrases, you know, there's always a choice that can be made. If not about what you do, you've got a choice about how you do it. Mm-hmm. And if you can, a lot of the stuff in emotional logic goes down to that point. And this is particularly to do with depressions. When people have tried and failed and they're feeling very constrained and restricted, and it looks as if nothing's working, and, you know, the prospects are looking horrible. And you know, but what we teach about that depression's, what we call a depression stepping stone, not when it's clinical depression, that goes another step, but as part of grieving, people hit that point where they're feeling empty, powerless. What's the point? Why bother? What we teach about that is that it's the place of decision. And you go to that place of decision feeling powerless. And because of the way we map people's emotions and go through that to name their losses and then reinterpret the losses as their personal values. So you end up with a list of someone's personal values through recognizing what they're at risk of losing. People realize they've now still got a power of choice over which of those losses I'm going to focus on to try and recover. Yeah. And how I'm going to do it. What bargaining style am I going to use? And so on. These are the sorts of things. So you go to the depressive emptiness feeling powerless, and you come off it with a greater power of choice. Yeah. But that choice is vital. That will determine how you come through this environmental situation you're in at the moment. Your choice will affect that. We're not just victims of our circumstances. We shape life. We do. Not totally, of course. The force is much bigger than us, but we still have a power of choice how we respond to that in the midst of the pressures that we do experience. And to help people understand their emotions as part of that equipping to make those choices, even though things feel pretty horrible and overall it looks pretty desperate. Nevertheless, people can respect themselves, find that energy is moving, take another step forward, connect with somebody new in this situation, take a bit of a risk here. That sort of stuff can move situations on slowly. So that's the sort of way that we work with all of this power of choice in the midst of difficult circumstances. Yeah.
And it's, I think a lot of times one of the things that stops people because it seems too big. But I always like this little saying, and you kind of hinted at this idea, which is that it's easier to turn a car that's moving 5 miles an hour than one that's at a complete stop. So the idea is to just start, because that little bit of energy generates more energy.
Totally with it.
More energy. Yeah. So if just starting small, even if it's, I had a friend to say once to another guy who he said, why don't you just start? He goes, which pocket do you keep your car keys in? And the guy took out his keys. Well, they're in my left pocket. He goes, I want you to move them to your right pocket. Let's just start there. And he did it. And he goes, ooh, this feels really weird. It doesn't feel right. It just feels like, ugh. He goes, keep them there. Just do that for a week. Let me know. It was an interesting moment. We were all laughing because it was such a minute, silly thing to do. But it does. If you move your keys from the habit pocket to the other pocket, you will feel different immediately and uncomfortable, actually.
I love it. Absolutely with what you're saying. That very small first step can seem enormous as a choice to actually do it. And we also have the same thing. We encourage people to make very small actions, right? They're actually achievable in order to recover something that they've named. And people say, what you're saying, that's the answer to my whole problem. Just sort of go for a walk or whatever. And we say, well, no, it's not the answer to the whole problem, but it'll start the answer. Just, I'm totally agreeing with you. This is, that's really what we need to be encouraging people to just take that step, take that risk. It might be good,
Well, it's certainly, if what you're doing isn't good, it's probably not going to get worse. And maybe sometimes it'll get worse for a little while and then it'll open up something.
Yeah.
I love the title of your book. I want you to say the title and then so people can get it and read it and tell me what is, the highlights of what's actually in there that people can use to improve their situations.
That's fabulous. Thanks very much. Yeah, so the new book that's coming out on the 26th of January is called Clearing Away. Clearing Away, all right? It's basically mainly clearing a way through, but it's clearing away. And then the subtitle is Unveiling the Mental Tricks That Hide Reality. Unveiling the mental tricks that hide reality. And this came out of my initial understanding of the neuroscience of the way the brain can put information together to make us orientated in space and time and a real world. And also I got interested in what I call disorientation. So we can have orientated in space and time and reality, and substance. But also, if you have a little bit too much to drink, or if you end up with psychoactive drugs, or if there's a brain injury, dementias, there's lots of conditions that can start affecting the way the brain works. Your sense of orientation in space and time, and as a real person in this real world, can get completely disrupted. So we know that this mental framework that we have is a mental construct. Yeah. And everybody's making the same sort of mental construct, but we all have slightly different ways of putting it together, which is all part of our being unique. But what I then sort of was working on two strands at the same time. One was this emotional thing that connects us through our values. So even though you might be putting together your mental world in one way and I'm putting mine together in another, we actually can share common values. And these emotional connections become vital information flowing between us. That's like the energetics of things. Yeah. But also, our physical bodies are working along the same informational lines of organization, of organizing reality. And so basically, what this book is about is that core thing that I've already talked about. The theme that runs through the whole thing is how do we recognize and name our personal values and then build a future on those values by building relationships with other people who actually see the world completely differently, have totally different worldviews. And so often what happens is that we like to team up with people who see the world the same way as us. But an awful lot of work on teamwork, team building, you know that you need to have a set of diverse skills and so on in a team to make the team work really efficiently. And in life generally, in communities and society, there's such a wide range of beliefs between people that at the moment we're living in a world that is getting very polarized. If people don't agree with a certain set of beliefs or ideas that I have, or I don't like their behaviors or whatever, there's very little common ground now where people can meet and say, actually, we've got a really depth relationship going on here. We're part of one society. We've got to make it work. How do we communicate even though we see things differently? And the technique of getting to name our values rather than comment on each other's behavior or on just talking about our feelings, but getting down to that level of talking about our values, we've found that people find solutions and are able to work together to build a future much more effectively, and it's much more stabilizing for society. So that's basically what the book's about, is how can we form what I'm calling trust groups, where we get together with people who are different to us. And we talk about the way the world looks to you and the way that it looks to me. And there's a structured way that sort of comes out in the book of looking at our worldviews, what's really important to you, and helping each other to see the world from the other person's point of view, from the world, from their world. Now, this is pretty core stuff. We're not just talking about political beliefs. We're talking about really what you value in life. Do you value the environment? Or do you value profit? What is life all about? Is it about that holiday? Or is life about the fact that, when the climate's changing, we're going to need to sort of pull together to try and help each other through. That sort of level. And so the main theme from the beginning is that we've got climate change coming up, and actually environments are going to get troubled. Population shifts are going to make life unstable. There's going to be economic challenge coming up. Do we pull apart and end up fighting each other to cope with that? Or can we find common values with trust groups that can enable us to build a more stabilized future, even in the midst of large-scale change, where everybody's affected by this change? And that's the key. It's about forming trust groups based on values. But what then happened is, as I was writing about this, it went really deep into the way that we actually see life. I also became interested in the physics of the body, our embodiment. And physical health comes out of really being in tune with ourselves and each other in a harmony, a relational harmony around those values. So the book also goes into, I'm going to sort of repeat what I said right at the beginning, the informational patterns that are flying around in the body, right, can actually be calmed by the informational patterns that are flying around between a group of people sitting in a room who are learning to trust each other and not feel threatened by each other. You know, the two are intimately related. And then because a group of people together can have an impact on their local environment, yeah, to turn that into an action plan with this trust group is how we're going to modify our environment, given that the climate's changed, crops aren't growing, whatever, you know, there's all sorts of things like city farms that are forming up, community centers, you know, how we meet together. It's a book that's looking at that emotional processing, to make choices, to build trust groups, to turn our emotions into action plans that are going to help us to adapt and adjust to a changing, massively changing environment that I believe is coming up, you know, over the next 20 years. So how does that sound? Does that make sense?
It makes complete sense. It makes complete sense that, you know, the things I'm looking at some of the missives I might have about that, which that being only really one thing. How do you deal with people that are in denial of these things that are coming and that are unwilling and unable, perhaps because of, you know, their historical education or entrenched beliefs, unable or unwilling to actually do the thing that you're talking about, which is to be open to getting along with somebody who doesn't think the way you think. That's my frustration. It's like I would love
Absolutely.
to be able to, you know, and the best I can do personally is try to find the first thing I try to do in situations is not fight or say you're an idiot and look at the facts. I don't that stuff doesn't work because it just puts up walls. People go, well, you know, you don't like the way I think, you know, screw you. I'm not going to listen to you. It's to find something. It could be anything that you have in common first. So you have this human connection. Let's say I'm talking to somebody and I find out that they're interested in guns and, you know, target practice and shooting and all this stuff. It doesn't really interest me that much, although I do know a little bit about it. So I would ask that person, tell me about your gun collection and where. Now, this is not a topic I even care about that much. You know, I'm somewhat fascinated by people that are into it because I'm not. But I would ask those kinds of questions. Tell me about the guns. What do you like about it? What do you? Yeah. I've actually had this. I've used this with people. And one thing I did own a shotgun for a little while. And I loved the smell of the oil that you use to clean the gun.
Right on.
So that's where I start. I go, I love that smell. I don't know why. I just, you know, I had this shotgun and I love cleaning it because I love the smell of the oil. And then the person might perk up and go, yeah, me too. And now you have this tiny thing, and I'm, you know, could be diametrically opposed to, you know, socially, politically, any of it. But now you have now you've created a situation where the person actually has some trust.
Yeah.
Oh, you're not that different than me. You actually have, and the thing that I find interesting about that, it's a biological thing, like the sense of the olfactory sense that is sort of a turn on.
Yeah, well, and smells are so powerful for that, aren't they? Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's right.
So that's about as you know, that's where I try to start with somebody that doesn't think like me. But most of the time, I don't spend time with people that don't think like me because I find it off-putting.
Well, can I just tell two stories about this?
I love it.
Keeping them short because I'm absolutely with you. I love what you said there, you know, Bob. That's exactly the right thing about finding a connection. So we get people to make out lists of things that they're worried they might lose when they're facing a challenging situation. Yeah, fairly focused situation. And we did this work in Israel, Palestine. right, with an organization that's bringing together Israelis and Palestinians, particularly the women. And they were obviously at loggerheads with each other, but willing to explore, new ways. This was several years ago. It's not during this immediate crisis that's going on now.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was when they started listing these, we then said to them, right, now we turn that list upside down, so to speak, or inside out. And we say, you made a list of losses, what you're worried about you might lose, but those are actually a list of your values, right? So what we want to do now is you swap, you Palestinians, you give your list to the Israelis, you give them to the Palestinians. And do you know what we found? 80% were the same.
Yeah,
80% of those values were just common human values.
Right. I want to have a great place to live, food, love, safety, all the things everybody human wants. Yeah.
And the political system was stopping them from talking to each other. The healing is in the conversation. Just as you've been saying, the smell of that oil can bring us together enough to have a conversation. This is so that was just one example. The second one I want to give was we've done some work in Oregon. And we have what we call book groups where they read this book and discuss chapters, and a host has got some questions and things like this. Anyway, out of one of those, there was a guy, I can't remember whether he was Republican or Democrat, but he had a colleague who was the opposite, right? And they were both concerned about what was going on in their town. And he went to them and he picked up a technique that we'd been talking about, which is if you've named what you're worried about losing in a situation and interpreted that as a value, right? You can speak that out to somebody else and say, look, this is what's important to me. What's important to you? And this Democrat and this Republican did that, and they discovered that they both had most of what they were aiming for was identical values. Yeah. They just had different ideas, about how they would go about that.
Yeah.
But now this is the bit that I was hoping to seed in people's minds, because I'm a great believer in seeding something that might grow later on, because I believe life is all about growth. Yeah. Because they had named a value, yeah, that memory stayed with the other person, and they were able to cooperate in the way they responded to the town council's proposals for this or that, for whatever was going on in the town. They cooperated across the political boundary. Yeah, because of the way they'd seen things. Now, you started off talking about the people who are in denial, the people who are so deeply entrenched in a way of life that is so utterly different to yours. They're not interested in conversation. Yeah, I would still say that if you are able to name your values, say what's important to me, what I would miss if life went a different direction. That's a key way of saying it. I would miss this if life went in a different direction. Yeah, so you're almost making yourself a little bit vulnerable by saying that. Yeah, but if life went a different way, I would miss this. You have seeded something in that person's memory. If they even heard that little bit. Now you were talking about the opposite. You seeded in that person's memory that you're a guy who actually likes the smell of that oil. And we've got this connection. But if we look at someone who's totally in denial, where you just haven't got that level of conversation. If you're able to assertively state what's important to you, what you would miss, when that person comes to the limit of their way of life, when the environment's changed so much, they might think, are guns the answer, or is there something different? We don't know, but you can't do more than seed the potential for that moment when it comes.
Well, there's nothing like desperation to get people to be open to a new way of looking at things. You see it all the time in the sort of physical health field, where somebody is up against the wall with a fatal illness, and they change their complete diet and exercise and they get into meditation and all this stuff, and they heal themselves. You've heard that story a million times, but they were not willing to do anything until they were up against the wall. And it's unfortunate that human beings a lot of times have to do that. It has to go that far before they're willing to and I always wonder about this. When I was looking at the title of your book, and you talked about the mental tricks that we tell ourselves, and I always wonder, like, you ever come out of a period of time when you're behaving a certain way and things aren't going right. And you go, what the heck was I thinking back then? And then my next thought is, what am I doing now that I'm going to look back and go, what the hell were you thinking? But I'm in it, like I think I've, gone past this thing that was not, but am I doing it again? Am I tricking? When am I tricking myself?
Mm.
Not for the better. When am I doing that? How do I know that
Yeah,
I'm doing that? And it's an interesting idea, because if I like to think that if I'm constantly questioning what I'm not in a way that's debilitating, but I'm constantly looking at the way that I'm approaching things and asking myself, well, is this really working? Will this work in the long run? That's the other part of it. It's like the ability to look into the future a little bit and see, well, if 1, 2, 3, 4 happens, what's 5 and 6 going to look like in a year from now? And
yeah.
is this the way I want to go?
It's yeah. I mean, basically people get into that book is putting three major types of veiling of reality, hiding reality. The reality is the depth of our relational connection with each other and the cosmos, with the world. We are utterly in that relationship. But the way the brain works separates that out into various things. And one of them is called materialism. We think the answers come in gathering stuff and having stuff, having just making sure we've got the economics to get stuff, be surrounded in that. But when environments happen, when the fire comes along and burns up all your stuff, you suddenly think, actually, there's got to be something else in life as well. So another one is that some people go down the deeply spiritual line, but they sort of submit their lives to a life force. And they put themselves under this authority if I just follow this spiritual path, then I'm going to be all right. But actually, people who follow that line too much are ignoring the opposite. That actually you do need to eat. You do need to have some, the physical. And people go to extremes all the time. Those are the mental tricks that veil reality, which is we need a balance. And the third one, which is what makes the possibility of balance, is this whole thing that we actually believe life's all about information, that the more I know about something, the more it's all going to work out, and people can become obsessively learning all the time, or getting into this computer world, the idea of, that we can download our personality into a computer, is that informational approach pushed to an extreme, forgive me, a ridiculous extreme, because our identity as a human being is in our relationships. We need each other. This is what this all gets resolved, excuse me, in these trust groups, the ability to meet with people who are different to us and understand what's important to them, what would they miss, what would I miss, how can we cooperate in order to build a better locality, rather than, doing an Elon Musk, let's go off to some other world. It's focusing on this one. That this book is all about, how to get that together. Yeah.
I want to ask about something that is that's very evident, but it isn't really talked about much in these kinds of things, or talked about enough. And that to me it's the energy that's the underpinning of the whole universe, which is love. And where does that, and
yes.
how does that come in?
I
And
love it.
yeah, big
Yeah,
topic, great topic. It's such a powerful thing. All the different types of love that are available,
absolutely.
and how that elevates us to be able to. Because if you look at it, if you look at the opposite being hate, which it seems like a good opposite, and how destructive that is, and how
Yeah,
it doesn't accomplish one thing.
yeah.
It So go ahead. Let's talk about love
Well,
before we end
you're
this.
right. This
Hmm.
is where the book ends up. It's all about love.
Oh, okay.
But being the presence of loving kindness in group situations, being the presence of loving kindness. And I extend that down into, I'm a little bit interested in the quantum physics as well, the roots of our physical reality, and where all the unpredictable things are shaped and can actually happen and change life. But there it is also that presence of loving kindness, the the actual nature of physical reactions between people in our embodiment, where in the world itself, is intelligent love. The intelligence is built into matter. So that we have quantum computers. If you cool certain types of matter sufficiently, it behaves in a way that intelligently calculates change. That type of intelligence is in our chemistry, in our bodies, and in our brains, and we're living that in our social connections with each other. But it's a bit difficult to explain it in one sentence. But the energy in a group of people that can be mapped onto being the presence of loving kindness for each other, the warmth of kindness, the affirmation of each other that comes about with a loving connection. Love, I mean the enduring connection despite all change. Enduring connection despite all change. And that gets into the physics of our chemistry as well as our relational understanding of each other. But the energy of that, I can map onto the same energy that goes on in stars, that generates heat and light from stars, that we as people together in a group are actually generating our equivalent of heat and light as we are being the presence of loving kindness for each other. And that is not airy-fairy, cotton wool type love. Love is made known as joy and as grief. And we can untangle the grief and harness that into the kindness of how we respond with warmth, even when people are saying things that hurt us. How can we slow that down, keep the environment warm? How can we still be present for each other rather than walking off and storming off and just breaking things up? It's tough. It is tough, but that's tough love. Great, let's live it. Let's go with it. Yeah.
Well, we're here to meet the challenge, I hope, and
yeah,
we'll see how that goes. And be interesting to live a really long time just to see how humanity fares in the future.
Yeah,
and we'll see, or we won't. I'll either be here to see some of this, or I won't. Well, either way, I'm glad I met you today and had this conversation because I think we talked about a lot of wonderful things. Is there a website people can go to learn more about you and the book and all that? Because we'd like to tell our listeners.
Yeah, thank you. My personal insights blog site is called relatedness.net. Relatedness.net.
Okay.
So just put that one in the URL, and you should end up on my site onto the insights page. You'll be able to see the sorts of things I'll pop down there. About all this area of life, and then you can access the books as well through that site and other things as well. And following the release of this new book, Clearing Away, Unveiling the Mental Tricks that Hide Reality, I'm going to be starting up a Substack community where people can actually learn more about it, because the book goes quite deep in places, so people will want to sort of study it a little bit more and form trust groups in this community to develop their learning a bit further. So that's mentioned on that website as well.
Oh, good. Yeah, I've heard. I know Substack is quite a great platform. So that's.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're doing that. There's a lot of great information you can get on Substack, and
it's a very dynamic site.
Yes. And so big thanks to you, Trevor Griffiths. And I said it right. I know
You have got that. Thank you.
It's a little tongue twisty in the THS, but I did it. Thank you so much for offering all your wonderful thoughts and studies and research and all the things you've done. It's just fantastic. And folks, find Trevor where he just mentioned and learn more. Why not?
Thanks, Bob, for this opportunity. It's been lovely to talk with you.
You too. Thank you so much. Much appreciation for you folks listening to The Exploding Human. The website is theexplodinghuman.com. The YouTube channel is The Exploding Human with Bob Nickman. Once again, I want to thank Trevor Griffiths for being on the show. Check out the book, Clearing Away, Uncovering the Mental Tricks that Hide Reality. Have a fantastic day. Thank you.